We've done a bit of death, some order, and of course a splash of bloody chaos, but it's time to look towards the forces of destruction in all of their destructive glory. And today we are opening up the admittedly small but also very big forces of the Sons of Behemat. Now again, this isn't a faction I know all that well, apart from being big stompy giants, which I immediately love. They are of course an extremely low model count, high wound, super elite army with a somewhat limited roster, but what they lack in numbers, both on and off the battlefield, they do make up for in sheer carnage. The battle traits mainly revolve around a set of rampage abilities, which your entire army, being all monsters, can make use of, but they also get the very fluffy rule of Timber, which is a hilariously fun rule, and that means that whenever a Gargant or Mega-gargant in your army is killed, each player rolls off, and then the winner picks a point on the battlefield within 3 inches of the slain model, and you inflict D3 mortal damage on all units, friend and foe, within 3 inches of that point that have a lower health characteristic than the Gargant that just died. So it is a bit harder for it to hurt your own models, but will basically impact almost every other model in the game when it comes to your Mega-gargants. Now, it's not a huge amount of damage, and I kind of wish that the roll-off specified that if there were ties, you won as the controlling player, just to make it a bit more likely that you will be the one that gets to choose the positioning, but it's a decent bit of extra splash damage to a few units if your opponent had thrown in a couple of units to gang up to try and bring your Gargant down. The actual rampage abilities from the battle traits are quite familiar. They are very much inspired by the ones we've known from the 3rd edition in the main rulebook, and that seems to have been largely copied over to the Sons of Behemat for their own personal use. Gargant Charge is in the charge phase and is used on a Mega-gargant or a Gargant that hasn't used a rampage this turn. They get to pick an enemy unit within 1 inch of them, and you roll a d3, and then you do that much mortal damage. It's not super exciting or spectacular or amazing as rampages go, and I would say the others are all a bit better, so unless you've used all of them or you really do just want to try and kill a weakened enemy hero off with that d3 roll, you're probably going to be better off going for one of the other rampages most of the time. Earth-shaking Roar is in any combat phase, and this lets you roll a dice, and on a 3+, an enemy unit in combat can't use commands for the turn. So this is a really strong way to not do any damage per se, but to turn off things like all-out attack or all-out defense, which will enable you to survive a bit better or just do that little bit more damage onto an enemy. Colossal Slam is a fairly hilarious one that lets you pick a monster or war machine within 1 inch of your Gargant in the combat phase, and again you have to roll a dice, and then on a 3+, you can pick it up, and then you put it back down within 1 inch of your Gargant, and then it takes d3 mortal damage. But the big thing here is it doesn't say you have to put them down where you pick them up from, so you can swing them anywhere around your base as long as it's within 1 inch when you put them down, so you can very easily move something out of buff ranges of enemy heroes or get them to within combat range of one of your other units so that one of your other units can potentially then activate and pile into them. So it has a lot of niche uses, and I would say the d3 mortal damage is almost kind of inconsequential. The ability to pick up and move an enemy unit, even if it is just within 1 inch of your base, is a really strong tool. Jump Up and Down is the final one from your battle traits and is a fantastic anti-horde rampage. It's kind of like the spells we've seen in a lot of armies so far. You pick an enemy infantry unit in the combat phase and you roll a dice, and on a 3+, you can then roll a dice for each model in the target unit, and on a 6, they take a mortal damage. Now, if you use this rampage on a Mega-gargant, it's on any 5+ that they take damage. So you can potentially do 6 mortal damage to a unit of 20 infantry before the fight even starts. They are overall some fun battle traits. I would say they're not super amazing perhaps compared to some of the other armies, but things like Jump Up and Down are very good against infantry, and the combination of these rampages used amongst the units in your army will really help you to spin out bigger units that may be trying to bog you down or turn off commands for a key combat that you are in, so they will be useful throughout most of the game. The formations, again, we have 4 of them in this faction pack, and they are actually all quite useful. Take a Tribe gives you essentially a free artifact with more stuff for me collection. This is done in deployment, so you can very much cater it to suit the matchup that you are facing, so that is really nice, and as we will see in a bit, some of the artifacts are quite decent, so this isn't a bad formation to have. It just doesn't feel to me quite as fantastic in that this is the whole battle formation ability. The entire formation is just you get 1 extra artifact, and I mean they can bring some solid buffs to your Gargants, so they are nice. It just doesn't feel quite as expansive or useful as some of the other formations that we've seen in other armies. Boss Tribe brings you a Big Mouth, which is a once per turn ability when you declare a fight ability with your Mega-gargant. After that Mega-gargant has fought, you can pick a friendly Gargant, so one of the smaller giants, and they can fight immediately afterwards. So if you want a nice bit of double activation on your guys, this can be very good, and it is of course really useful in such a low model count army where you want to be attacking with as much as possible before the enemy gets to do all of their swings back. Break a Tribe gets you the Besieging Bulk passive. That means that when a Mega-gargant is within combat range of another Mega-gargant, they get a 6-up ward. This isn't too hard to do really, as you can quite easily keep your Mega-gargants nice and close together, and having a 6-up ward may not sound like much, but when you have a solid 35 or 40 health, it basically means an extra 5 or 6 wounds which the enemy is gonna have to get through. The big downside for this one for me is that you have to keep your guys together to get the buff, which obviously makes it much harder for them to then go off and start capturing different objectives around the battlefield. So I think this one, yes, it makes your guys much more durable, but it potentially makes it a bit harder for you to score points and win games. Finally, the Stomper Tribe is another passive. Revel in War lets you pick 2 Gargants or Mega-gargants to use the jump up and down rampage instead of just 1. Now, I think the jump up and down rampage is the best in your battle traits, so getting 2 Gargants doing it instead of just 1 is a really big bonus, and if you had 2 Mega-gargants going into the same 20 strong infantry unit, your first Mega-gargant could use it and kill around 6 of them, and then your second one would kill about another 4 from the remaining 14 models, so you could fully wipe out half of an enemy unit before combat even begins with this formation, so it can get you a really quite terrifying amount of output. Overall, I think the formations are again all right. The Stomper Tribe, the Breaker Tribe, the Boss Tribe are all quite good, and I do like them. I do really like the fact you can get that free artifact with the Taker Tribe, which you really can set up nicely and use it to get you a really good matchup based on what you are going up against. So that kind of reactive ability for it does make it very appealing. But I always love an extra Feel No Pain, so the Breaker Tribe getting you that 6-up ward. I know that's not the same thing, but I was in 40k mode for a second. That extra ward, that extra layer of defense, I do like, so I do like the Breaker Tribe from that perspective too. The Sons get 3 heroic traits called Big Personalities, and they come in the form of Furious Temper, which is once per battle, but gives you +2 to your melee attacks at the expense of having a -1 to your save rolls for a turn. Now, I really don't like the downside of this. I wish it was just a flat +2 attacks for a turn. I think the -1 to your save for the turn is just a bit needless. Because, I mean, yes, 2 extra attacks on giants is great. Yes, don't get me wrong. But if they felt that was too much, why not just make it +1 attack for a turn and then not give you the annoying debuff as well? I just hate things where you get a benefit, but then they also take something away from you too. It just makes it feel much less good to me. So even though +2 attacks to your Mega-gargant for a turn is going to make them really scary, I just, the -1 to your save as well really turns me off it. Monstrously Tough is hugely strong though. It just gives you a flat 5 extra health, taking you from 35 to 40. So this is a seriously good bonus here, essentially netting you an extra 15% of your health. And then the final one is the only real competition to Monstrously Tough in my opinion, Rabble Rouser gives you +1 to charge rolls for all Sons of Behemat units that are wholly within 12 inches of the bearer. So you can, with their bases, get quite a big aura of +1 to charge rolls, which on your army is very important because getting into melee is absolutely where you want to be. Unlike the other factions, the Sons actually get a whopping 6 artifacts as well, which is really good, especially with the formation to let you potentially pick another one. There are 3 passive artifacts and 3 which are once per battle, but I think all of them at least have some use. The Amberbone Totem is in your charge phase once per battle and lets you charge even if you've ran, which is a nice and powerful bonus that again will help you get into melee that much faster, and it does combine really well with that Rabble Rouser trait too. Glowy Lantern is the next once per battle artifact. This is in deployment. It lets you pick a manifestation lore and your hero can use summon abilities as if it were a 1-cast wizard. Now this is just nice if you wanted a specific manifestation to give you some buffs or healing or put some extra attacks into your enemy, and letting you pick it in deployment again does let you be really reactive with it, so you can decide exactly what you need to get the most out of a situation. The last once per battle artifact is in your combat phase. The Mantle of Tusk and Horns gives you +1 to hit for friendly Sons units wholly within 12 inches of the bearer. So a fantastic +1 to hit buff for essentially one turn of an all-out attack aura. Now most of your units do hit on 4s, so this is going to be really handy and really help you get to that clutch 3+ to hit for a crucial turn. On to the passives now, and we start with Extra Calloused Feet, which is just lovely, I suppose. It gives +1 to the attacks, rend, and a damage characteristic of the bearer's Almighty or Almightier Stomp attack. Now this is a decently solid attack on your Mega-gargants. It's got 2 rends and D3 damage, so getting an extra attack and moving to 3 rend and a D3 +1 damage on it means you are quite likely to do just that little bit more into an enemy unit when you do fight with it. The Glowy Shield of Protection lets you reflect some mortal damage onto enemy units when you roll an unmodified save roll of 6. So if you've got a lot of weaker chaff attacks coming into your hero, he can do a little bit of damage back to your opponent and take, a few 1 health infantry out for the trouble. So it's nothing amazing, but it can again help you clear through bigger units that may be trying to bog you down. Finally, the Kingslaughter Cowl gives you +1 attack to your hero when he is fighting a hero. Now, you are almost certainly going to be fighting a hero at some point of the battle with such a small army, so having a hero that can do even more damage into those precious enemy characters is to me just a flat win, and I would say this artifact will definitely get you some noticeably improved output in a solid 99% of your games. So some good traits, some really good artifacts, and I think using the formation to get a second one can be really useful just to get 2 of these that do match up really well. They do have to be on separate Gargants, so you can't double up artifacts onto one Gargant, but getting 2 to get, that run and charge for a turn or the ability to summon some manifestations as well as some extra damage output with the Kingslaughter Cowl could get you 2 really solid, useful Gargants in your army. On the War Scroll front, we have seen Kragnos already in some of the previews, so we won't cover him in too much depth. He has lost his 2-up save going to just a 4-up, but he's gained a 5-up ward instead of the 6-up he had before. He's also dropped a tiny bit in points, going down to 680 from 700, so it's not a huge drop, but it is at least a decrease. He can still move super fast and get those terrifying 4 damage attacks with his mace, as well as doing up to 36 mortal damage with his rampaging destruction, which is quite frankly terrifying. And then he also does buff your army quite well, especially the Gargants. He gives your units +1 dice to their charge roll when they're within range of him, which is fantastic for getting your Gargants into combat that much quicker. So he is a pricey but very welcome unit to add in to your Sons of Behemat, especially in those bigger games. The first of the actual Gargants though is King Brodd himself. He is a 520 point 40 wound monstrosity with a 4-up save and is also a 1 chant priest, which is fairly fun. In terms of his weapons, he's got the Death Grip, which is one attack that hits on 4s, wounds on 2s with 2 rend and d6 damage with +1 rend against heroes, 2 Mighty Stomp attacks for those 2 rend or 3 against infantry, d3 damage hits with his feet, but his main weapon is the Obelisk of Torcrania, which has 6 attacks. They do only hit on 4s, but wounding on 2s with 2 rend and a flat 5 damage is insanely powerful and means that alone with the mace, he can average over 10 damage into a 4-up save unit. He also can't be picked as a target for enemy rampages, which is a nice way to keep him a little bit safer from certain enemy debuffs. He can't be one-shot. This is the Sons of Behemat rule that all of your Mega-gargants have, and means if he would be destroyed automatically by, say, Archaon or Nagash with their abilities, instead your Mega-gargants take 6 damage instead, which they can't make a ward save against, so he is immune, for the most part, to things like Hand of Dust or Slayer of Kings. He can also move over non-monster models and terrain which is less than 4 inches tall as he is stomping around the battlefield with the Longshanks rule, which is just really nice to help your Mega-gargants get the most out of their mobility and just not get tied up on terrain as much as they maybe would do if they didn't have this rule. It just helps you get around the board a bit more easily so you can get up and into combat. In terms of his priest abilities, his chant, the Power of Behemat, is a 5+ and lets you pick one of 3 effects, or if you chant it on a 10+, you can pick 2. They are Shatter the Mountain, which gives +2 inch movement to all friendly Sons of Behemat units for the turn, Might of the Earth, which heals all of your units for d3 health, or Pummel to Dust, which gives +1 rend to all of the main club weapons of your Gargants. So Brodd's Obelisk, but also the Menhir Club, the Boulder Club, the Massive Club, and basically all the other primary main melee weapons for your other Gargants. So it's a great way to bring either some more healing or some more mobility, or just some better rend army-wide, which is a fantastic buff that he can bring. Now though, we get onto the selection of your actual Mega-gargants. These are all similar in many ways, but they do have a few unique War Scroll abilities. They all come with 35 health and a 4-up save, with a 10 inch move and a whopping 20 control, and they degrade to 10 control and lose a few attacks on their main clubs when they take 15 or more damage. The Beast Smasher Mega-gargant has the Menhir Club, as well as the Almighty Stomp and Death Grip we saw on Brodd. The Menhir Club has 4 attacks that hit on 4s, wound on 2s, with 2 rend, a flat 5 damage, and get +1 rend against monsters, so he is your anti-monster Gargant. He likewise has the Longshanks and Sons of Behemat rules to let him move over terrain and avoid any instant death abilities, but his unique rules are Behemoth Brawler, which means you subtract 1 from the attacks of enemy monsters while they're in combat with him, which does wonders for his survivability, and also the Beast Breaking Strike. This lets you, in any combat phase, use this ability instead of your regular fight ability with your melee weapons, and you get to pick a monster and your Gargant can pile in, and then you roll a dice, and if you roll a 4+, you just do a flat 5d6 mortal damage to the monster. So if you don't want to use your regular attacks and you just want to risk that 50-50 roll, this will, on average, if you roll that 4+, do around 17 to 18 mortal damage to an enemy monster, which is really terrifying. It will outright one-shot pretty much anything up to and including, nearly Nagash. Like, obviously Nagash has got a 5-up ward save to protect him, but he's only got 18 wounds, so it could, in theory, one-shot Nagash. The Gatebreaker Mega-gargant is the anti-terrain fella. He actually gains a ranged attack. He can throw a big boulder, which is an 18-inch range 1 attack that hits on 3s, wounds on 2s with 3 rend and 4 damage. So it's a fairly scary profile, but it's also not super reliable thanks to just being 1 attack. His Fort Crusher Flail hits on 4s, wounds on 2s with 2 rend and 4 damage and has 6 attacks, and it goes to rend 3 against faction terrain, which isn't the most useful thing to get a bonus against, but if that's what you're up against, it will definitely do some solid work. His ability is Pulverizing Strike, and again, this can be used instead of his normal melee attacks. This lets you roll a dice, and again, if you roll a 4+, it goes off, and you do 4d6 mortal damage. So it's 1d6 less, but this is against any enemy unit in combat with him. So you can still do a huge amount of damage, and you can do it to monsters or infantry or cavalry or whatever. And this will, on average, if it goes off, let you kill 7 Chaos Warriors outright with just that mortal damage. So he's really good at clearing through pretty much anything that isn't a monster, because the Beast Smasher just does that slightly better. He can also use Smash Down, which is once per turn in any combat phase and lets you do d3 plus 3 mortal damage to a faction terrain piece, and then you roll a d3 for each non-monster unit within 3 inches of the terrain, and on a 2+, you do that much mortal damage to them as well. Next up we have the Kraken Eater. He actually doesn't get any bonuses against monsters, which I kind of thought he would given the name, but he actually has less attacks. His main weapon is the Shipwrecker War Club. It's only 4 attacks, and again they hit on 4s and wound on 2s. They are 2 rend and 4 damage, so he is less killy in melee, but he has a decent shooting attack. He's got 3 shots which are 24 inches. They hit on 4s, wound on 3s, with 1 rend and d3 damage, but again, the main uses for him are in his War Scroll abilities. Get Off Miland is once per turn in your hero phase, and this lets you move an objective, which is just bonkers good. You pick an objective within 1 inch of him, and on a 2+, you can move it 2d6 to a new position more than 1 inches away from models, terrain features, and other objectives. So you can literally just steal an objective, literally steal it from the enemy, which is fantastically powerful for getting the most out of your small number of models in the army. His other ability is Stuff 'em in Minette, which is once per turn in any combat phase, so yours and the enemy's, and you pick an enemy unit in combat with him and you roll 3 dice, and for each roll there is at least double the target unit's health characteristic. 1 model is slain. So this is only really going to be super reliable against 1 health enemies, because then you need to roll a 2+, but even against 2 health enemies you could kill off 1 or 2, and if you really spiked it, you could just insta-kill 3 health enemies if you rolled 666s. And I mean, that's really unlikely to happen, but on the rare occasion you manage to just stuff 3 Blood Knights into your net, it's going to be hilariously fun and seriously annoy your opponent. The final Mega-gargant is the War Stomper. He is great into infantry with +1 rend against them, and his Boulder Club, it's only 4 attacks, but it does hit on 4s, wound on 2s with 2 rend. It is only 2 damage, so he can do some work, but on the face of it, he doesn't seem that impressive. His Stomp, however, is a bit better than the others. It's got 4 attacks rather than 2, so it can potentially do twice as much damage as the other Mega-gargant stomps. So while on the face of it he may look like the weakest Mega-gargant in melee, he actually can get some really nice help with that. His Boulder Club can be lethal into big units. It gets +2 attacks for each 5 models in a target unit if he puts all of his attacks into them. So into a unit of say 20 skeletons, he could be getting 12 attacks, which means on average he will kill 10 of them outright with his club alone. He also gets the Hurled Body rule, which lets him roll a dice against an enemy unit in combat, and if the roll is again double the target unit's health characteristic, you kill off 1 model in that unit, and you can then pick another enemy unit within 12 inches of him and do mortal damage to that unit equal to the slain model's health characteristic. So again, most of the time this is probably just going to be 1 or 2 mortal damage, but it is quite funny to think of him picking up a guy and just hurling him so hard into another enemy unit that he flat out kills a few more of them. Overall, the Mega-gargants are largely similar, and they all have a fairly similar price point. They've all stayed around the same for the most part, with a slight increase or decrease across the board. The Gatebreaker is the priciest at 500 points, whilst the Kraken Eater and the Beast Smasher come in at 470, and the cheapest is the War Stomper, who is a cool 460 points, although that is 20 more than he was in 3rd edition. The final unit for the Sons of Behemat is the smaller Mancrusher Gargants. These can be taken either in a unit of 1 or in a bigger unit of 3 strong for either 160 or 420 points. They do have a piddlier 12 health and only a 5-up save, and they are slower with only an 8-inch move. They also have a fairly bad ranged attack that only hits on 5s. It does wound on 2 with 2 rend and d3 damage, so it's not going to hit much, but it can do a little bit of work when it does. And then in melee, they can club, kick, and headbutt their opponent. The club is 4 attacks that hit on 4s, wound on 2s with 1 rend and 2 damage, whilst the headbutt is the same hit and wound but has 2 rend and 4 damage, which is very nice. And then the kick is again 4s and 2s with 2 rend and d3 damage. So all told, he can potentially do 15 damage in combat, which isn't awful. And then he can also always run and charge if he is wholly within 12 inches of a Mega-gargant. This is thanks to his keep up ability and is really good. It helps them get into combat that much more reliably and is just a solid way to make sure that your entire army will hit the enemy battle lines at around the same time because of the better movement that your Mega-gargants have. And then finally, once per turn in any combat phase, he can also attempt to stuff an enemy into his bag. You roll a dice, and again, if the roll is double the target unit's health characteristic, one model is slain. He doesn't get to throw them at anyone like the War Stomper, but still being able to kill off an extra 1 or 2 health model can potentially just squeeze out a victory for you when you need it. The only extra thing is if you take the 3 strong unit, they get a passive Ooze Under the Heel now, and that gives them +1 to their Gargant charge if you use that rampage. So they are now able to do either 3 or 4 mortal damage to an enemy as they charge in. It's nothing major, but again, it could help you kill just a couple of extra models when you really need it. Overall, the Sons of Behemat are a very simple, very straightforward army that want to just get in, get up close, kick, stomp, and whack the enemy into oblivion. They are pricey and they are very small in model count, but they can do a lot of work. They have some great artifacts to make use of, and their unique war scrolls are all terrifyingly strong in terms of their wounds, their attacks, their damage, and also their control. They are very, very good at taking and controlling objectives. I think Brodd is great, and I love the Kraken Eater for his stealing objectives rule, and also the Beast Smasher for that 5d6 mortal damage into an enemy monster. So there is a lot to like, and a lot of potential in this faction, I think. But as always, what do you think of the Sons of Behemat? And if you've been playing them, how have they been performing for you so far in 4th edition? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe for more Warhammer content from me, but until next time, I'll catch you later, guys.